Okay, let's just get this over with. Can't escape these games. This is all just an excuse to use all the leftover footage I have from the last upload. Okay, so imagine, you're Valve in the early 2000s and you just took the Quake engine and injected some steroids into it and created the Golden Source engine. You make one of the best shooter games ever made at that point in time, Half-Life. And you want to make the second one on a new engine with physics that actually work. Bro, why does it move like that? So you go on and make one of the best physics engines ever made for your sequel to Half-Life. But you want people to have a way to play the first Half-Life game before they play Half-Life 2. So you remake Half-Life into said physics engine, the Source engine, and call it Half-Life Source. Then you bundle it with Half-Life 2. Half-Life Source barely meets the requirements for a remake. The game looks the same, there's no new content, really the only change is the new engine. It doesn't even function properly. I mean, look at these glitches, man. Fortunately, Valve also remade Counter-Strike in the Source engine, and that one went a lot better for them. It's in a new engine, and the graphics have been updated here, and the game looks pretty good for the time. Other than that, it's just Counter-Strike, but there's nothing wrong with that. Anyways, I've talked about Valve games too much recently, so let's just move on to the next section of the video. Yeah, the title of this video really should be Nintendo video game remakes in the early 2000s. There were really only 4 major players in the 2000s when it came to the console scene. You have PlayStation, who didn't really have a reason to remake games, and all PS1 games worked perfectly fine on the PS2, and they're only like 5 to 10 years old at this point. You have Xbox, who just got into the console scene, so they didn't even have games to remake in the first place. Then you have Sega, who has games they could remake, but they're a little too busy dying. So really most of the remakes here were from Nintendo, since they had a back catalog of games and new consoles to put them on. So let's start talking about Super Mario 64 DS. Super Mario 64 originally released in 1996 on the Nintendo 64 as a launch title. It was one of the first 3D platformers, and it set the bar for what a 3D platformer should be. Huge open levels to explore, plenty of secrets to find, and controls that are responsive, mainly the joystick. This little stick on the N64 controller allowed full 360-degree movement, unlike the D-pad on the PS1 controller, and that range of movement was amazing for a 3D platformer. Now we go to Super Mario 64 DS and... this game makes me feel empty inside. Released in 2004, Super Mario 64 DS was a remake of Super Mario 64 for the DS. Gotta love how good Nintendo is at naming things. This game is everything a remake should be. Updated graphics and assets, all the original content and a ton added onto it. Gambling with Luigi? There's this one major flaw here. Remember what I said about how the joystick made 3D platforming amazing? This game is played with a D-pad. If you don't understand why that's such a big deal, let me explain. A D-pad can have a total of 8 inputs. These 4, and then the diagonals. This gives Mario 8 directions he can move in. But let's say you want to move here. The D-pad will look you dead in the eye, say I hate you and everything you stand for, and then throw Mario off a cliff, leaving you to restart the entire level. This game broke me. It's so close to being a great remake. But if I want to play Mario 64, I am not going to grab my DS because of the stupid D-pad. The original wins here. Let's just move on to a different game. Yeah, this video should actually be titled Nintendo Video Game Remix for the Game Boy Advance in the 2000s. That's too lengthy of a title. Nintendo decided that they wanted to remake every NES game on this thing, but they did make one remake that wasn't based on the NES game. Pokemon Red and Blue released in 1998 for the original Game Boy and starred the biggest media franchise in the world. It's a great game and many people enjoyed playing it, until their save data randomly disappeared. Yeah, the way this game saved was not designed for longevity at all. There's a tiny stick of RAM on the cartridge, and when you save, all the data in the Game Boy RAM and CPU gets sent to the stick of RAM on the cartridge. It's pretty similar to how a save state on an emulator works. Then, when you take the game out of the Game Boy, in order to make sure the data stays in the RAM even though there's no power going to it, there's a battery that keeps the RAM stick constantly on. That battery doesn't last forever though, and once the battery dies, the RAM turns off and you lose all your save data, and your game can't save anymore, therefore making your cartridge completely useless. So Game Freak went and remade the game for the Game Boy Advance. Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen released in 2004, and now people can experience Kanto with updated graphics. There isn't much new content here until you get to the post-game. You can't access any new Pokemon until the post-game, and while there is a new area, again, most of it is blocked to the post-game. Other than those changes, it's just a new version of Red and Blue, but this one isn't a ticking time bomb, so that's pretty good. Anyways, let's move on to the next game. Now on to NES remakes. Kirby's Adventure was an NES game released in 1993, and it sure is a game. I don't have much else to say. Kirby's Nightmare in Dreamland was released on the Game Boy Advance in 2002, and it's the exact same game but with slightly better graphics. There are new bonus games, but I didn't play any of them. But hey, they exist! There's also a multiplayer mode for this game, but I didn't play it either because it's kinda hard trying to find someone in 2023 who owns a Game Boy Advance, a link cable, a copy of Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland, and who actually wants to play multiplayer. All in all, this game is just kinda mid, both the original and the remake. If I had to choose, I would play the remake of the original just because of the better graphics. But really, I just hate Kirby games in general. They're too boring, they're too easy. I feel like I'm just walking in a straight line. There's no challenge here, man. I want to play a real platformer. Like Mario. And that brings us to the next game. Mario Bros. Originally released as an arcade game in 1983, Mario Bros. Is the first appearance of Mario in a video game. Well, second appearance, but first named appearance. And this game plays awfully. There's no air control. When you jump, you keep the same amount of momentum you had going into the jump, and you can't change it at all midair, making the controls of this game feel really stiff. The version on the Game Boy Advance actually has air strafing, and it makes the game actually playable. This game is actually a really fun time waster, and overall just a great fun arcade game to try to get a hard score in. But it doesn't really deserve to be a standalone game though. It would work better if it was bundled in with another game. Oh yeah. So I don't know if this counts as a true 2000s remake, as Super Mario Bros. Advance 4 is a port of the Super Mario 3 remake and Super Mario 3D All-Stars on the SNES released in the 90s, but this is still a pretty decent remake. All it really does over the original is have a slightly better graphics, but just being one of the best 2D Mario games portably is more than enough to justify this being made. There is some new content in this game in the form of new levels, but they are all locked behind the e-reader attachment, so I didn't play them. I know it truly is a great remake though. Metroid Zero Mission is a remake done right. Metroid released on the NES in 1986, and it was a groundbreaking game defining an entire genre, and I don't know what I'm doing. This game gives you absolutely no instruction on where to go. But this was all fixed in Metroid Zero Mission, released in 2004 on the Game Boy Advance. This game is the best way to play the original Metroid. First of all, I actually have a general idea of where I need to go. Second of all, the graphics are updated. Third of all, I can actually move the blaster in more than 3 directions. There's also new content in this game in the form of the random Chozo ruins, and this whole Zero Zoot Samus section at the end of the game, which is a ton of fun. Really enjoyed this section. This game is exactly what a remake should be. A game that is so much better than the original, there's no reason to play the original game over it. But this isn't the final remake I want to talk about today. The final game I played, the best remake ever, is Bubble Bobble Old and New for the Game Boy Advance. This game somehow plays worse than the original and is a complete fever dream. I don't know what's going on. How do you make a remake worse than the original? I don't even care enough to talk about it. Look, there's bubbles, there's bobbles. Why does this exist? World outro, go.